When you think of the most deadly diseases ever, what comes to mind? Smallpox, perhaps? Or the Spanish flu? Well, how about one that killed an estimated 75 to 200 million people across 4 continents? That'd be the Black Death, otherwise known as the Bubonic Plague. And while it's commonly known as a European pandemic, it was really a worldwide catastrophe. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that this was a global health crisis. It's estimated that the plague reduced the world population by 30 to 60%. So if you want to understand the Black Death, we're going to have to do some world building. So let's start at the beginning. The Black Death arrived in Europe in the mid-14th century, killing millions in a relatively short time span. But it didn't originate there. The plague first appeared in Asia, around 1346, arriving in Europe 2 years later through trade routes. More specifically, it came via rats and fleas that lived on those rats, which had picked up the disease in Asia. Now, these fleas and rodents were stowing away on ships that traveled along the Silk Road, that extensive network of trade routes connecting East and Western Asia with Europe. This particular plague was caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis, and it turns out that bacterium is still around today. As we speak, there are somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 cases of bubonic plague around the world every year. It's mostly in rural areas of India, Africa, and the United States. But back in the 1300s, the Black Death was something new and terrifying. And as the infected rats disembarked in Europe, they unleashed a nightmare that would ravage the continent for 5 years. But even as the death toll mounted, Europeans weren't entirely helpless. Early on, they did have some success fighting the disease by practicing a form of quarantine and by burning suspected plague-ridden buildings to the ground. Unfortunately, those tactics didn't work all that well, considering how easily the plague spread. And once a community became infected, the only thing residents could really do was watch as the plague progressed through 3 distinct stages, each more deadly than the last. First, there was the bubonic plague, which is what the disease is named after. This stage was characterized by painful swelling of the lymph nodes, which we call buboes. The second stage, the septicemic plague, occurred when the plague bacteria entered the bloodstream. This proved even deadlier than the bubonic plague. Not only did it cause the blood-filled blisters that gave the illness its second name, but it also led to organ failure and spontaneous bleeding. But that wasn't the worst stage. The third and final stage, the pneumonic plague, happened when the plague bacteria infected the lungs. Victims with this form of the illness could spread the disease just by breathing. And unfortunately, almost everyone who contracted the pneumonic plague died. By the time the pandemic reached its end in 1353, it's estimated that up to half of Europe's population was dead. Those who survived, however, did live in a profoundly changed world. For one thing, so many people had died that there simply weren't enough workers to go around. For centuries, Europe's feudal system had been based on a rigid hierarchy in which peasants farmed the land owned by nobles in exchange for protection. But with the labor shortage brought on by the plague, the old system started to fall apart. Peasants had more bargaining power now, and many began to seek better working conditions or started their own farms. As for those who survived the plague, the experience reshaped their attitudes toward medicine and science for the pandemic. Much of Western Europe relied on a medical system based on the ancient Greek and Roman ideas about balance and humors. But the Black Death proved that such theories were wrong and useless against certain illnesses. It was during this time that people started to question long-held beliefs about the natural world and began to look for new explanations. In art and literature, the Black Death was a common theme. Artists depicted the horrors of the plague, and death became a popular subject matter. The painting The Triumph of Death by Peter Bruegel the Elder is a particularly haunting vision of the pandemic's impact. It shows skeletal figures riding across a landscape, reaping the souls of humanity. To make matters worse, some blamed groups like Jews, foreigners, and religious minorities for the plague, leading to persecution and violence against them. While Europe reeled from the effects of the plague, other parts of the world were hit hard as well. For example, the Middle East had experienced outbreaks of the disease before. But during this time, entire communities were wiped out. Cities like Cairo and Damascus were nearly deserted as the plague took hold. In some ways, though, the pandemic may have helped to usher in the Islamic Golden Age, a period of cultural, economic, and scientific advancement in Muslim history. It's because the plague coincided with a massive population decline in the Middle East. Some historians suggest that this drop in population may have actually spurred innovation, since there were fewer people competing for resources and positions. We can see a similar phenomenon in China where outbreaks of the Black Death occurred in the 14th and 15th centuries. Some scholars have argued that the plague actually helped to transform Chinese society from agrarian to commercial, which led to the country becoming a significant player in the global economy. But regardless of how the Black Death impacted China and the Middle East, it's safe to say that it devastated the Americas. When the Spanish began exploring and conquering the Caribbean, they brought diseases like smallpox with them, which devastated local populations who'd never even seen a Spaniard. By the time the conquistadors reached the mainland, they were met with abandoned cities and few survivors. So while we often think of the Black Death as a European pandemic, it was truly an international tragedy, and its effects rippled across the globe for centuries. It's easy to think of pandemics as modern phenomena, but the truth is, they've been around for hundreds of years. And understanding past outbreaks can teach us a lot about the challenges that lie ahead.